Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your daily deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Chris, and joining me as always is Laura.
Happy Saturday, Chris. It is July 11th, 2026, and today we are digging into what might be the strangest report card a frontier model has ever received. Grok 4.5 just finished its first days in the wild, and the independent verdict is genuinely split down the middle.
Split how exactly? Because the launch messaging from Elon Musk made it sound like an unqualified triumph, with claims about landing number one on multiple benchmarks and performing better than expected across the board.
Well, both stories are true at the same time, which is what makes this so fascinating. On one hand, Grok 4.5 posted the single best agentic tool use score of any model on the artificial analysis leaderboard. On the other hand, its hallucination rate more than doubled, jumping from 25% to 54% in a single generation.
Hold on, let me make sure I heard that correctly. The model got dramatically better at doing things and simultaneously got dramatically worse at telling the truth? That sounds like a contradiction that should not be possible.
It sounds impossible until you look at how these measurements actually work. Let me lay out the scoreboard first. Artificial analysis ranked it fourth on the intelligence index with a score of 54, behind Claude Fable 5, GPT 5.5, and Claude Opus 4.8.
Okay, so fourth place overall. That is respectable, but not the number one story that launch day suggested. Where does the number one claim actually come from? And is there any substance behind it?
There is real substance. On July 9th, Musk posted that Grok 4.5 landed at number one on the SWE Marathon, which is a long-horizon software engineering benchmark that tests extended coding sessions with planning, testing, debugging, and iteration. And separately, the Agentic tool use result is legitimate. No model on the board scores higher at chaining sequential tool calls and executing actions.
For listeners who do not live in benchmark land, can you unpack what agentic tool use actually means in practice? Because I suspect that phrase means nothing to most people hearing it for the first time.
Absolutely, because it is where the whole industry is headed. Agentic tool use measures whether a model can operate software on your behalf. Think calling APIs, running code, writing files, and stringing those actions together in the right order across a long task. It is a completely different skill from answering questions from memory.
Got it. So it is less about what the model knows and more about whether it can competently drive the machinery around it. Now let us get to the uncomfortable part, because that hallucination number is genuinely alarming.
It is the most counterintuitive result of the entire launch. On the previous version, Grok 4.3, the measured hallucination rate was 25%. On Grok 4.5, it hit 54%. And here's the twist. Over the same jump, the accuracy score actually rose from 35% to 52%. The model answers more questions correctly than before.
So walk me through how those two things coexist, because my intuition says a smarter model should hallucinate less, not more. How does knowing more make you wrong more often?
The key is what happens when the model does not know something. Artificial analysis put it perfectly. The model knows more, but it is also more confident when it is wrong. Older versions would hedge or refuse when they hit a gap. This one plows forward and invents an answer with total conviction.
That reminds me of a certain kind of new hire, honestly. The brilliant one, who genuinely does know more than everyone else in the room, but who has never once in their life said the words, "I'm not sure."
That is exactly the right mental model, and there is an architectural reason for it. Grok 4.5 runs on the new V9 mixture of experts architecture at 1.5 trillion parameters. All that extra capacity means it can generate fluent, authoritative-sounding answers in domains where its training signal is actually thin. Capability and calibration are different things, and this launch proves they can move in opposite directions.
So what does that mean practically for a company that is evaluating this model right now? Because a 54% hallucination rate sounds disqualifying on its face, and yet you are telling me it leads real benchmarks.
The routing rule that emerged from day one coverage is surprisingly clean. Grok 4.5 is a strong choice for agentic workflows where outputs get validated before anyone acts on them. It is the wrong choice for any workflow where the factual accuracy of the generated text is itself the product, like research summaries or client-facing answers.
Explain why the agentic side is safer, though. If the model hallucinates half the time when it is wrong, why would I trust it to take actions on my systems any more than I trust its prose?
Because actions have feedback loops that prose does not. If the model calls an API that does not exist, the call fails instantly and visibly. If it writes code that is wrong, the tests fail and it gets pushed back to fix them. The environment itself catches the error. But a hallucinated fact in a paragraph sails straight through to the reader looking exactly like a true one.
That is a really useful distinction, and I want to hold on to it as we move to the economics, because I understand the pricing story here might actually be the bigger deal for businesses than any benchmark.
It might be the biggest story of the whole launch. Grok 4.5 is priced at $2 per million input tokens and $6 per million output tokens. But the wild number is token efficiency. On SWE Bench Pro tasks, it resolves problems using just under 16,000 output tokens on average, compared to about 67,000 for Claude Opus 4.8. That is a 4.2 times efficiency gap.
Okay, translate that into actual money for me, because tokens per task is an abstraction that only engineers love. What does that gap mean when the finance team looks at the bill?
When you compound the cheaper price with the fewer tokens, a single agentic coding task costs roughly 10 cents on Grok 4.5 versus roughly $1.68 on Opus 4.8. That is about a 17 times cost difference per task if the efficiency claim holds up in production.
You said if it holds, and I caught that hedge immediately. What are the caveats here? Because vendor benchmarks have a long and glorious history of evaporating the moment they meet somebody's real workload.
There are two big ones. First, the efficiency numbers come from XAI's own benchmark runs, and analysts like ChatForest are pointing out this likely reflects how the new architecture generates solutions rather than a universal improvement, so it may not transfer to your task distribution. Second, there is a quiet regression nobody is advertising. The context window actually shrank from 1 million tokens on Grok 4.3 down to 500,000.
Wait, the context window got cut in half in a flagship upgrade? That seems like a genuinely strange trade-off to make. Did the company offer any explanation for why they went backwards there?
No public explanation at all, which is telling in itself. The most likely story is that serving a 1.5 trillion parameter model at a full million tokens of context requires memory trade-offs they chose not to make for launch. Notably, they kept Grok 4.3 available for workloads that genuinely need the bigger window, which quietly acknowledges the regression.
All right, let us talk about the benchmark that impressed you most, because you told me before the show that the professional work evaluation was the one that actually changed your mind about this model.
That would be Snorkel AI's independent evaluation on roughly 2,000 GDP Val Plus tasks. These are not multiple choice questions. They are actual workplace deliverables authored by domain experts, things like legal analyses and healthcare documentation. Grok 4.5 scored a 29% mean pass rate versus 22% for GPT 5.5 and 21% for Opus 4.8.
A 7 or 8 point lead on real professional work is not a rounding error. Where exactly is that lead concentrated? Is it spread evenly, or does the model have specific professional strongholds?
Heavily concentrated in judgment-intensive domains, which is the surprise. Legal work came in at 40% versus high 20s for the rivals. Education hit 58%. Healthcare hit 35%. Quality assurance analysis hit 37%. And across all 6 tracked error categories, it posted the lowest error rates of the 3 models, including much less missing domain analysis.
Do you have a concrete example from that evaluation? Because abstract percentages are one thing, but I always find a single specific task tells the story better than a whole table of numbers.
There is a great one in Snorkel's write-up. On a wage and hour liability task, Grok 4.5 was the only model of the 3 to satisfy every single expert criterion. It correctly handled a subtle legal nuance in a rate calculation that both GPT 5.5 and Opus 4.8 missed entirely. That is exactly the kind of detail a paralegal gets paid to catch.
Now I have to push back, because these 2 findings seem to be at war with each other. How is the model that hallucinates the most also the model that is best at careful professional work? Those feel mutually exclusive.
This is the deepest lesson of the whole launch, honestly. The hallucination benchmark measures open-ended recall, where the model answers from memory with nothing to check against. The professional tasks are grounded. The model gets source documents, contracts, figures, and its job is analysis over provided material. Grok 4.5 is apparently excellent at grounded reasoning and dangerously overconfident at unsupported recall. Same model, opposite behaviors.
Let me play devil's advocate on the coding results too, Because I have heard there's a contamination issue that makes some of the most impressive numbers essentially unusable. What is that story about? Story.
It is a real problem. Grok 4.5 was trained on Cursor ID session data that came with the Anisphere acquisition. The trouble is that Cursor Bench, one of the coding benchmarks, was itself derived from real Cursor user sessions. So there's an unresolved risk that test problems literally appeared in the training data, and reviewers are saying those particular scores cannot be treated as valid independent measurements.
There was one more controversy that apparently dominated the launch discussion, and it was not about any benchmark at all. It was about trust and politics. What was actually being argued about there?
The loudest thread on Hacker News on launch day was about whether a model controlled by Elon Musk can be trusted on politically sensitive topics, given his active political interests and documented skew in earlier Grok versions. The counterpoint in that same thread was testers reporting the model is actually quite tame in practice. The evidence is honestly mixed.
How should a company think about that, though? Because trust is not really a benchmark you can wait for. It is more like a prior you bring to the vendor relationship before any evaluation starts.
The cleanest framing I saw goes like this. For tasks that are explicitly political in nature, this model carries a trust uncertainty that models from companies without active political entanglements simply do not carry. For professional coding, legal, education, and healthcare work, the independent results suggest performance that stands on its own regardless of the politics. You price the risk by task type, not by vibes.
We should also mention who cannot use this model at all right now, because there's a significant geographic hole in this launch that European listeners will care about quite a bit.
Grok 4.5 did not launch in the European Union. The company cited regulatory compliance review, and the backdrop is the EU AI Act's high-risk enforcement deadline on August 2nd of 2026. They are targeting mid-July for EU access, but at launch, European developers simply could not get it through the API, through Open Router, or through the major clouds.
And all of this landed during what might be the most crowded single week in the history of frontier model releases. Set the scene for people who were not glued to the news cycle this week.
It was absurd. GPT 5.6 launched publicly on July 9th in 3 sizes named Sol, Terra, and Luna. OpenAI shipped ChatGPT work the same day, and Anthropic countered by launching Claude Cowork on mobile and web within hours. Meanwhile, Gemini 3.5 Pro is now 6 weeks late and still has no confirmed date. Grok 4.5 had roughly 1 day of clean air.
Zooming all the way out then, what does this split verdict tell us about where the industry actually is right now? Because it feels like the era of one simple leaderboard answering every question is completely over.
That is exactly the takeaway. There is no best model anymore, only best model for a given task shape at a given price. This launch made the routing decision explicit. You might use one model for cheap high-volume agent work, another for long context analysis, and a third for anything where an unverified wrong answer is expensive. Model selection is becoming a genuine operational discipline.
The trend that worries me is the calibration one, though. If scaling up capability keeps making models more confidently wrong at the margins, that seems like a problem the whole industry inherits, not just one vendor.
It is a known pattern in large reasoning models, and it argues for treating calibration as a first-class metric right alongside capability. The 54% number got attention precisely because artificial analysis measures it and publishes it. If every leaderboard put hallucination rates next to intelligence scores, buyers would make better decisions and labs would optimize for honesty as hard as they optimize for benchmarks.
So let us leave people with something actionable. If a listener's team is staring at this model on Monday morning, wondering whether to adopt it, what is the 3-step version of your advice?
Step 1, match the model to the task shape. Agentic and grounded work, yes. Unsupported factual generation, no. Step 2, keep a validation loop between the model and anything that matters, tests, reviewers, or checkers. Step 3, run the token efficiency claim on your own workload before believing the 17 times cost advantage, because your tasks are not the benchmark's tasks.
Beautifully practical, as always. Any final thought before we wrap up today's episode? Give me the one sentence you want people repeating at their Monday stand-up about this whole strange launch.
Here it is. Capability and reliability are officially diverging, and the most important number in any model released this year is not the benchmark it wins. It is how it behaves when it is wrong. Grok 4.5 wins real benchmarks and fails that test more than half the time, and both facts should shape how you use it.
A perfect note to end on, and a genuinely fascinating story to watch as the independent testing continues over the coming weeks. That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.